Well, last week, many were shocked by two high-profile deaths. Fashion mogul Kate Spade and celebrity chef Anthony Bourdain both took their own lives. The deaths have ignited a conversation about suicide prevention. According to the CDC, the suicide rates are rising. It says nearly 45,000 Americans took their own lives in 2016. 25 states saw a 30% increase in suicides from 1999 to 2016. It's now the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S. CBSN political contributor Michael Graham has a new op-ed on CBSNews.com focusing on this public health crisis and its potential political impact. He spoke with my colleague, Elaine Quijano.
Michael Graham is the politics editor for NewHampshireJournal.com and a columnist for the Boston Herald, as well as a CBSN contributor. All right, Michael, you begin your article by asking the question, will suicide become the opioid epidemic of the 2018 midterm elections? What do you mean?
Well, you know, when Donald Trump left Iowa in the Republican primaries, he had lost, and he was headed to New Hampshire, where Ohio Governor John Kasich had basically moved in as an attempt to win the first-in-the-nation primary. And there were some questions about how would Donald Trump really do. But during the course of the campaign leading up to the primary, Trump had seized on the issue of the fact that New Hampshire was leading the nation in opioid addiction. And he talked about it from a policy standpoint. Of course, he tied it to the wall and drugs, but he also talked about it in a personal way. And I remember at the time covering the race going, this is kind of a side issue, whatever. Turned out that a lot of people missed that this was truly a kitchen table issue for voters in New Hampshire. And it's part of the campaign that propelled him. He didn't just win New Hampshire. He got more than twice as many votes as John Kasich, the second place finisher. And it showed the power of this personal issue. Well, now, this week, we had numbers come out that showed that not only has America as a whole experienced a 30% increase in suicide rates, but New Hampshire had the third highest jump in the country, 48% increase in suicides over the course of the period measured by the CDC. And it's really hitting home with people. And you start to wonder, could this be another one of those issues that gives politicians an opening to show a connection between their policies and the people that they're trying to reach out to?
And Michael, expand on that for us. Why do you think there are similarities between this issue of the opioid epidemic and suicide deaths?
Well, you know, as a health issue, there's a connection obviously right there. But it is interesting, isn't it, when you look at where are the problems? For example, Appalachia, part of Donald Trump's voting bloc, if you will, they've had a disproportionate rise in both opioid addiction and in suicides. Some people speculate that there may be a connection between the two. When you look at where the suicide rates are highest as far as groups, you're looking at men, you're looking at middle-aged and older men, you're looking at white men. White people commit 80% of suicides, and men commit 77% of suicides. When you say white, male, middle-aged Appalachia, that's pretty much a Donald Trump campaign rally right there. So this is another issue that gives candidates, and I want to be clear here, not just Trump, it gives Democrats who are trying to pull some states back from Trump an opening to say, here's a a kitchen table issue for your family. Here's what we're going to do about it.
Well, you're right about how Donald Trump focused on the opioid epidemic as a major issue during his campaign. Why do you think that resonated with so many voters?
Well, because when your brother, your son, ends up addicted to drugs, it has an impact on you as a person. It's easy, particularly for Republicans, to talk about, economic issues in theory. And a lot of times you think, is this a campaign speech or is this guy giving a lecture? But when it's my family is in financial trouble because one of the key breadwinners, my husband, my father, is addicted to opioids, that has a real impact. Now, echo that out with suicide, which is traumatic personally. I can't even imagine the level of tremendous loss. And then the economic impacts as well. When you have, somebody who's, you're once again a breadwinner that you lose. The impact is tremendous, and it's a place where policy and people can really overlap.
Well, earlier you mentioned New Hampshire, but in researching this topic, Michael, what areas did you find suffer the highest rates of suicide in the country?
Well, it's interesting. Montana is #1 for the highest rate right now. Montana has a very contested Senate race in 2018, a state that Hillary won big, but has a Democratic senator. The biggest increase in suicide rates over the course of the study was in North Dakota, which is in the same situation. Generally speaking, the highest rates are in the West, and then there are also some pockets, like I mentioned, in Appalachia. There's an interesting conversation about gun ownership. There tends to be a correlation between whether or not people in a state are, commonly own guns and suicide, because guns are so often used in suicide. And that points out yet another place where there can be a political conversation that really gets people personally engaged, that deals with important substantive issues like gun laws and gun control in the United States.
Well, broader than just politics, what would the benefit, Michael, be for the country if the president does in fact seize on this opportunity to focus on suicide rates, just as he did with opioids?
Well, let's not suggest there might be any behavior for personal gain here, but sometimes that personal gain has a positive public impact. I was reading in the Washington Post that June has kind of been declared unofficially opioid month on Congress. Almost 60 bills are passed through committees. Several are going to get a vote. They're talking about $1 billion in new funding. And that's what happens when an issue has both, public policy aspects and political aspects. So you could definitely see a similar circumstance. These numbers from the CDC are new. They just came out last week. If people start talking about them on the campaign trail, if Republicans start suggesting that Democrats in swing states haven't done a good enough job, if Democrats start saying, hey, where's President Trump on this issue, you may start seeing legislative impacts. You may start seeing more funding for mental health. You may start seeing candidates talking about what their policy will be if they are sent to Washington in the upcoming primaries. It could definitely be a key issue. And for example, New Hampshire hasn't had their congressional primaries yet. You could definitely see candidates saying, let me tell you why I can make a difference here in a state where this has been a huge deal.
Michael Graham, a really interesting way to look at this critically important issue. Thanks so much, Michael.
Thanks for having me.